My name is Morgan Collins. I am 19 years old. And 3 weeks before I was supposed to start college, I found out my parents stole $245,000 from me. My grandmother saved that money over 18 years, every month, every single month, so I could have a future. My parents drained it all to buy my brother a house. When I asked why, my mother looked me straight in the eyes and said, "Because he's the one who actually matters in this family." Have you ever felt like you're invisible in your own family? Please share your story in the comments below. Just like right now, I'm out for a drive to find some peace of mind. What about you? Where are you watching from and what time is it there? I'd love to connect with you. I did not scream. I did not beg. Crying is a biological waste of moisture, and in that moment, I needed every ounce of my energy to remain clinical. I stood in the living room of Linden Way, our pristine Victorian home that always smelled like expensive furniture polish, and suppressed resentment. Brenda, the woman who shared my DNA, but clearly none of my loyalty, sat on her favorite velvet ottoman. She was watching a home renovation show, her feet kicked up, sipping a tall glass of iced tea. She did not even have the decency to look ashamed. The room felt like it was tilting, but it was just the foundation of my life cracking. $245,000. That was not just a number on a ledger. It was 4 years of late night study sessions, every debate trophy I had ever won, and the promise of a life that did not involve being the background noise of Evergreen Falls. I could smell her perfume, that heavy, cloying, vanilla scent she wears to church every Sunday. To most, it smells like sweetness. To me, it was the smell of a well rehearsed lie. My father, Scott, was in the garage. I did not need to go in there to know he was staring at his workbench, hiding behind his wire strippers and electrical tape, refusing to meet my eyes. He had signed the papers. He had violated his fiduciary duty because it was easier to rob his daughter than to tell his wife no. I did not ask for an explanation. I did not need a why. The why was standing in the driveway in the form of my brother Caleb's new truck. He is 25 and still looking for his purpose, while I had built a map for mine before I was 16. But at Linden Way, purpose does not matter. Only the ranking system does. I walked past Brenda without a word. I did not slam the door to my room. I closed it with the same precision I used for my chemistry labs. Methodical, quiet. I reached under my bed and pulled out a hollowed out copy of a classic novel. Inside was not a story, but $1,250 in cash, my tips from 3 years at the coffee shop on Birch Avenue. My parents thought I spent it on clothes. I was saving for a world where I did not have to ask them for permission to breathe. I packed a single suitcase, essentials only. I was not leaving behind a home. I was abandoning a sinking ship. My heart rate was steady. I was not in a state of panic. I was in a state of accounting. My compassion for them had been a luxury they had overdrafted for nearly 2 decades. Today, the account was closed. I walked out of the house, my boots echoing on the hardwood floor. Brenda did not even look up from the television. I got into my car and drove away from the Victorian facade of Linden Way. I did not look in the rearview mirror. There was nothing behind me but a mausoleum of silence. 10 minutes later, I was parked in front of Grandma Eleanor's cottage. It is a small, white house with blue shutters tucked away behind a wall of hydrangeas. It is the only place that has ever felt like a sanctuary. This was not a breakdown. This was a balance sheet. I opened my laptop, the screen glowing with a different kind of sunrise, the kind made of facts, numbers, and quiet retribution. I picked up my phone and dialed the only person who actually kept the archives of this family's truth. "Grandma," I said when she picked up, "it is over. I am at your door." Life at Linden Way was never truly about family. It was about a ranking system that I had been audited by since I was a child. In that house, Caleb was the preferred stock, and I was the background noise. My brother is 25 years old, and he has perfected the art of the fresh start. He enrolled at state school and lasted exactly 3 semesters before deciding the professors didn't understand his creative potential. My mother, Brenda, didn't just agree. She threw him a celebration dinner. When he quit 3 jobs in 2 years, she called his bosses ungrateful. When he moved back home at 24, his old room was redecorated like a 5-star suite. I, on the other hand, was 19 and had spent my entire life becoming invisible. I made the honor roll every single semester. I was the debate captain and the valedictorian. I had worked part time at the coffee shop since I was 15, buying my own textbooks and clothes, never once asking for $1 of gas money. But every time I brought home a trophy or an acceptance letter, Brenda would barely look up from her phone and say, "That's nice, Morgan." I remember one evening specifically, during my junior year. I walked in with a report card of straight A's, and my mother was so busy laughing on the phone with Caleb that she just pointed at the kitchen counter. I set the report card down. It stayed there for 3 days, unopened and gathering dust. Psychologists call this the glass child syndrome. I was the glass child, the sibling who is so high functioning and reliable that their parents look right through them, focusing only on the child who is broken or demanding. Because I didn't require any repairs or maintenance, I became transparent to their love. But unfortunately, I remained very visible to their greed. I was the daughter who would always figure it out, which, in their minds, gave them a permanent license to ignore my needs. I kept wondering for years, what did I ever do wrong? Now I realize my only mistake was being too reliable. The ranking system was absolute. My excellence was a footnote, while Caleb's failures were treated like national tragedies that required immediate financial intervention. My parents viewed our relationships like a business transaction, and I had been the silent investor in their version of family for 19 years. I was the one footing the bill for their emotional stability, working double shifts so they wouldn't have to worry about me, while they funneled every resource toward my brother. One afternoon, I walked into the kitchen and saw my valedictorian trophy sitting on the side table. Brenda had used it as a coaster for a stack of Caleb's job hunting brochures. The cold condensation from her iced tea was warping the wood of the base. It was a perfect metaphor for my life at Linden Way. My hard work was nothing more than a convenient surface for them to rest their real priorities on. They didn't just take my money, they weaponized my resilience against me. They robbed me because they knew I wouldn't crumble, and they used my strength as permission to leave me with nothing. But the ledger was about to be balanced. I was sitting in the sunroom, the dust motes dancing in the light, when the peace of Grandma Eleanor's cottage was shattered. The sound of luxury SUV tires grinding against the gravel signaled her arrival. Brenda didn't knock. She hammered. I saw her through the glass chin high, eyes already brimming with those strategic, manufactured tears. She burst in, the scent of vanilla filling the small kitchen like a warning. "How could you, Morgan?" She started, her voice a wounded whisper. "After everything I've done for this family, you just walk out? You're tearing us apart." There was no mention of the $245,000. There was no apology for selling my future. In her mind, the crime wasn't the theft, it was my refusal to stay quiet about it. Then came the performance I'd seen 1,000 times, the martyrdom trap. She pressed a hand to her chest, her lip quivering with precision. "I have spent 19 years sacrificing my youth, my dreams, and my energy to give you a life on Linden Way. And now you're slandering your mother over a bank account? We are a family, Morgan. We make collective decisions." I looked at her and realized that to Brenda, collective meant whatever she wanted, and family was just a brand she used to hide her own selfishness. "It wasn't a bank account, Mom," I said, my voice as flat as a dial tone. "It was a trust, my grandmother's money." She didn't flinch. She just tilted her head with that patronizing patience. "Caleb needed a stable foundation. He's your brother. He's struggling. You have grit, Morgan. You've always been the one to figure it out. Taking out a few student loans is a small price to pay for family loyalty." My future was being liquidated to subsidize Caleb's lack of direction, and she was framing it as my moral obligation to be robbed. When she realized I wasn't going to fold, her eyes went cold. The loving mother mask slipped, revealing the status-obsessed tactician underneath. She pulled out her phone. "Be very careful, Morgan. People in this town know who I am. They know what kind of mother I've been." Within minutes, the Evergreen Falls Community Facebook group saw her newest update. "Please pray for our family," she wrote, her thumbs flying across the screen. "My youngest daughter has been blinded by greed and is attacking us during an incredibly stressful time. I am heartbroken, but I ask for your prayers and understanding. I watched the notifications start to roll in. Hearts and prayer hands from neighbors who only knew the Victorian facade of Linden Way. Brenda wasn't trying to fix the relationship, she was performing damage control. She was poisoning the well before I could even draw water. My compassion had been a financial resource she'd overdrafted for years, and now she was trying to declare emotional bankruptcy to avoid the bill. She wasn't shocked by what she'd done. She was shocked that I'd stopped playing along. But I wasn't just the glass child anymore. I was a witness with a receipt. Grandma Eleanor watched Brenda's SUV pull away, then turned to me with a look of calm, surgical precision. She was a retired archivist, and her entire life had been built on the preservation of truth through paper trails. She walked to her antique roll-top desk and pulled out 3 thick blue binders. These weren't scrapbooks of family memories. They were the archives of my stolen future. Inside the first binder were the original Uniform Transfers to Minors Act, or UTMA, account opening documents. My name, Morgan Collins, was listed as the sole beneficiary. My father, Scott's name, was listed as the custodian. Eleanor had kept every annual statement since the month I was born, 18 years of evidence organized chronologically with color-coded tabs. The final statement showed the current balance of $214.36. I love my daughter, Eleanor said quietly, but I have never trusted Brenda with a blank check. It was the first time I realized that my grandmother had been a silent guardian, watching for a breach she hoped would never come. At 2 that afternoon, Margaret Bowen arrived. She drove a silver sedan and carried a leather briefcase that looked like it had survived 30 years of legal combat. She was 60 years old, with gray hair pinned back and a handshake that felt like a vice. She sat at the kitchen table and spent 30 minutes in complete silence, except for the rhythmic sound of pages turning. When she finally looked up, her expression was clinical. "This is a clear violation of fiduciary duty," Margaret stated. "The money in a UTMA account belongs to the child from the second it is deposited. Withdrawing $245,000 to purchase a home for someone other than the beneficiary is not management. It is felony theft of custodial funds." The word felony hung in the air like smoke in the small kitchen. I didn't feel a pang of regret. I didn't think about the Victorian walls of Linden Way or the scent of vanilla perfume. I was no longer just a daughter being overlooked. I was a legal entity initiating a recovery operation. I had been the silent investor in my parents' version of family for too long. Now, I was calling in the debt. "File it," I said. Margaret nodded and began drafting the formal restitution demand and the criminal complaint for the Evergreen Falls district attorney. I watched her pen move across the paper, feeling a strange sense of alignment. For 19 years, silence had been my survival mechanism. Today, facts were my weapon. Brenda and Scott had relied on my compliance to fund their favoritism. They hadn't realized that the archive always keeps the score. The next morning, Margaret Bowen sat across from us with a look that was more predatory than professional. "They're going to argue custodial discretion," she said, tapping her pen against the mahogany table. "They'll claim they were acting in the best interest of the family unit, that the funds were fluid. My mother's lawyer would try to paint this as a misunderstanding between a loving mother and a sensitive daughter." But Grandma Eleanor just leaned back and adjusted her reading glasses, a thin smile playing on her lips, the kind of smile an archivist gives when they find the one piece of evidence that changes history. "They can argue until the sun goes down," Eleanor said, her voice like cold silk, "but they've been walking into a trap for 8 months. She pulled a single, notarized sheet from the back of the first binder. It was a rider she had attached to the account when I was 1 year old. It wasn't just a standard custodial account, it was what the bank called a trigger trust. She had specifically set the account to flag the bank's internal compliance department if the balance ever dropped below 90% of its peak value, without my in-person verification or notarized authorization. She had specifically set the account to flag the bank's internal compliance department if the balance ever dropped below 90% of its peak value. It required a specific set of notarized security questions and a dual signature authorization that only she and I held. Brenda and Scott had been withdrawing $9,000 and $12,000 at a time, thinking they were staying below the federal reporting thresholds. They thought they were being clever. They didn't realize that the moment they touched the first $10,000, the bank began a silent internal audit. The digital paper trail was already in the hands of the state's Financial Crimes Division before I even checked my balance. The bank hadn't been stopping them because they were waiting for the trigger to hit a felony threshold. Brenda and Scott hadn't just been spending my money. They had been providing a state agency with 8 months of evidence of systematic, premeditated fraud. Their argument of custodial discretion is dead on arrival, Margaret noted, her eyes gleaming with the thrill of a guaranteed win. By trying to bypass the biometric rider, they turned a family dispute into a documented criminal conspiracy. I looked at the documents, and for the first time, I didn't feel like background noise. I felt protected by a plan that had been set in motion 18 years before I even knew I needed it. This wasn't a family drama anymore. It was a forensics report, and the balance was finally shifting in my favor. The State Financial Crimes Division moved with a speed that only comes when the paper trail is paved in high-quality archival ink. Because Grandma Eleanor had set that trigger trust nearly 2 decades ago, the bank had already flagged every suspicious withdrawal Brenda and Scott had made over the last 8 months. The family trust Brenda had used to purchase Caleb's house was not a shield, it was a target. As soon as the prosecutor reviewed Eleanor's binder, the bank froze every asset tied to the stolen funds. Caleb was forced to vacate the property within days. Because the house was purchased entirely with criminal proceeds, the state moved to seize the asset immediately, leaving him with no legal right to stay in a home that was never technically his. It was a textbook case of the illusion of power in an empty wallet. Brenda and Scott had spent years performing status in Evergreen Falls, but they had forgotten the difference between having and being. Their authority at Linden Way, their membership in the garden club, and their high standing at church were all masks they had rented using my $245,000. When the money stopped, the mask did not just slip, it evaporated. They were discovering that power is a hollow shell when it is not built on character, and their character was currently being audited by the district attorney. I was standing on the porch of the cottage when they arrived for the final time. They did not hammer on the door this time. Brenda climbed out of her SUV slowly, her shoulders slumped and her face pale. Scott followed her like a ghost, his eyes fixed on the gravel. They looked diminished, like actors who had arrived at a theater only to find the lights turned off and the seats empty. "Morgan, please," Brenda whispered as she reached the porch steps. Her eyes were red, and for the first time, her tears did not feel rehearsed, but I knew they were not shed for me. They were tears for her own survival. "They are taking the house? Caleb is being put out on the street. He is your brother. All you have to do is sign this document saying it was a gift. We can tell the bank there was a misunderstanding. Please, we are family." I looked at her, and the old ranking system finally dissolved in my mind. I was not the glass child anymore. I was a person who had finally seen through the gaslight. "Family shows up. Mom," I said, my voice as cold and clear as the morning air in Evergreen Falls. "Family protects the future. It doesn't liquidate it for a down payment." I held out a copy of the formal restitution demand Margaret Bowen had filed that morning. "You told me at the kitchen table that I would figure it out because I always do." "Well, Mom, I figured it out. I chose Grandma's legacy over your lineage." I did not wait for a response. I did not look at Scott as he stood there, still silent, still a witness to his own downfall. I stepped back into the warmth of Eleanor's cottage and closed the heavy oak door. I turned the deadbolt, and for the first time in my life, the sound of a closing door did not mean I was being ignored. It meant I was safe. I walked back into the kitchen where the archives were open, ready to finish building the future they tried to take from me. Justice arrived in Evergreen Falls not with a bang, but with the dry, rhythmic sound of a judge's gavel. Brenda and Scott Collins accepted a plea deal for felony theft, 5 years of probation, 200 hours of community service, and a permanent felony record that would follow them for the rest of their lives. Caleb had to sell the house, the one bought with my stolen future, at a significant loss just to cover the initial restitution. The consequences didn't stop at the courtroom door. In a town like ours, reputation is the only currency that matters, and theirs was now worthless. Brenda was removed from the Church Women's Auxiliary Board and the prestigious local garden club. Neighbors who used to wave from their porches on Linden Way now turned their backs when Brenda walked by. Scott, a self employed electrician for 20 years, watched his business evaporate. In a tight knit community like Evergreen Falls, word of a financial felony spreads fast. No one wanted a man who robbed his own daughter handling the wiring in their homes, and soon the state revoked his professional license. They eventually had to sell the Victorian home on Linden Way and move into a small, one-bedroom apartment on the other side of town. Caleb moved into a studio apartment and finally had to pick up extra freelance work to survive. I started my environmental engineering degree at Evergreen State on time, fully funded by the restitution and the scholarship the university offered after the news broke. But I didn't just use that money for myself. I worked with the university to endow the Eleanor Scholarship Fund for overlooked students. We provide legal support and scholarships for high achieving, low maintenance children who have been treated like background noise by their own families. I wanted to make sure that other glass children knew they were finally being seen. I've come to realize that there is a profound difference between lineage and legacy. Lineage is just biology. It is the DNA you share with people who might not even like you, let alone love you. But legacy is the truth you protect and the values you leave behind. Grandma Eleanor taught me that family isn't blood. It is the people who would never dream of selling your future to buy their own comfort. She chose legacy. She went to her bank and withdrew $65,000, her entire personal retirement fund, the money she had spent decades setting aside for her own long-term care just to fund my legal battle. She sacrificed her own security to ensure I had a fighting chance because she believed I was worth it. If you are sitting in your room right now, staring at a life that feels like it's being drained by the people who are supposed to protect you, I want you to hear this. Silence is not strength. It is permission. For 18 years, I believed that being easy and quiet would eventually make me seen. I was wrong. My silence was just the license for them to take what wasn't theirs. When someone in your family takes your money, your peace, or your sense of self, setting a boundary is not a betrayal. It is not burning a bridge. It is building a door that only opens from your side, and you are the only one who gets to decide who is worthy enough to walk through it. Forgiveness isn't always for the other person. Sometimes it's the only way to set yourself free. I have forgiven Brenda and Scott for my own peace of mind, but I will never give them permission to hurt me again. For the first time in my life, my future is in my own hands, and that is a weight I am more than happy to carry. If this story reminded you of your own worth, hit that like button and subscribe. Don't let them keep you small. Tell your story in the comments. I read every single one, and this community is here to listen. You are worth standing up for, even when the person you are standing up to shares your last name. Thank you for staying until the very end.